Hello, my front-end friends, and welcome to my podcast, General Musings. My name is Kevin, and normally in this podcast, I talk about whatever is front of mind for me in any given week, related in some way or another to front-end development. But this week is going to be a little bit different as I sat down with my friend Chris Ferdinandi to talk about ADHD, how ADHD affected his career as a web developer, how it's actually really common within the developer community, the importance of the self-awareness of knowing that you have ADHD, and Chris also shares his experiences and strategies for managing ADHD in a professional context. Also really hit home for me, as you'll hear about as you're listening. So let's jump right into it. Yeah, Chris, thanks for coming on and here to chat with me about, of all things, ADHD, because I think most people, at least that follow me, know you more as the vanilla JavaScript guy. So I'm just curious what inspired you, first of all, to go down this ADHD path.
Yeah. Well, so Kevin, thanks again for having. I always love our chats. I've known I've had ADHD since I was younger. Uh, it has affected my career in lots of ways. It's created some interesting challenges. It's given me some unique superpowers that some of my fellow developers don't have. So it's a blessing and a curse. Um, and I've found that every time I talk about having ADHD, I get a bunch of emails from people who are like, "Oh, that sounds like me. Maybe I have it too." And then like a month later, I'll get like, "I got diagnosed and it's unlocked all these things about myself that have helped me. So like, thank you." Or yeah, just I get lots of, or I have it and I've always felt weird about talking about it. Thanks for like destigmatizing it a little. So
Mm-hmm.
the more I talk about it, the more people seem to like it. So the more I do it. So I ended up recently, I just spun off a whole, so that I wouldn't completely flood gomakethings.com with ADHD content. I spun up a separate website, as web developers tend to do. So if you go to adhdforthewin.com, I've got all my ADHD stuff now. Lots of tips and tricks and resources on figuring out if you have it, if you think you might, and what to do about it if you do.
Yeah, it was interesting you said that, like, as the more you've been talking about it, you've had other people saying things, because or mentioning that they think they might as well, based on what you're saying. And I'm curious, just it seems to be something that pops up a lot in the dev community, that you hear people saying, "Oh, I think
Mm-hmm.
I have it," or they already know they have it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's common for people that are in sort of this career path, or is it something that is more widespread in other areas, and it's just because that's the circle I'm in that I'm just hearing it for sort of our group?
I believe, I don't have hard numbers on this, but I believe that ADHD folks are overrepresented in the developer community. So, just as a quick high level, if you're not 100% familiar with the term, ADHD stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. You don't really have a deficit of attention. It's an executive functioning disorder. And for folks with it, you have trouble regulating your attention, which means sometimes we are like scattered squirrel kind of, people. And then other times we're like really overly focused on just one thing. But the underlying cause, and I shouldn't say cause because it's not like a thing that you can then fix. It's genetic. But one of the things that creates most of the symptoms associated with ADHD is that my brain does not make enough dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that regulates memory and learning and attention and a whole bunch of other things, ability to perceive time. It's another fun one. And so one of the things I have come to believe is that dev work is really almost like the perfect job for someone with ADHD for a couple of reasons. First of all, you're often thrown these big challenging problems that you need to work through. And so that it's almost like a video game, right? It's like, ooh, I got to work on this thing. It's really open-ended and confusing and difficult, but I've got these constraints. So that's fun. That's exciting. That hooks you the way a game might. And then it also features lots of really tight feedback loops. So you do a thing either happens or it doesn't happen with an error, or it happens but wrong. And now you've got to go figure out why. And for the same reason that video games are really addictive, but not always in a bad way for people with ADHD, because it creates all these dopamine spikes and my brain doesn't have enough of it. I feel like coding often does very much the same thing. And so you see a lot of devs in this line of work who have ADHD. And I think that's because our brains are uniquely well suited for this kind of work. We can do it really well and it makes us happy and it's fun. So it's like a win-win.
It's interesting you say that. I'm going to have to run for 2 seconds, though. I hear my kids screaming in the background.
No worries. Go get them.
Sorry about that.
We'll cut this in later. No, it's all good.
Yeah. Sorry. 1 second. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're quite all right. I was literally, when you go to watch this later, you're going to see me having like a dance party while you're away.
Nice.
And I'm living my best life today, Kevin.
Yeah. My younger one put his hand on the front of a Nerf gun and cocked it, and it somehow suction cupped the gun onto his hand.
Oh no.
I didn't know that was a thing, but there we go.
They make them a lot stronger than they used to. That's crazy.
Yeah. I'm glad you enjoyed the break.
We had just been talking about why it seems like there's so much more ADHD in the dev community than other places.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. And I like that point you bring up about the short feedback loops. That makes a lot of sense. And it's definitely, I think, with anything you're doing, every time you hit save and you see something happen, or you don't, and then have to figure out why. But I think that's a really good point. Now you did mention also earlier that when you were talking, when you talk about things, people sort of see themselves in what you're saying, even if they're not diagnosed with ADHD. Mm-hmm. And I think especially within our generation and older generations, a lot of people have undiagnosed ADHD. Yep. So just curious, you sort of talked a bit about what it is, but what are some of the signs that somebody might have it, I should say?
Yeah. So and one of the things with ADHD, I just want to caveat this. So you may listen to this and hear me say some things about myself and be like, oh, that sounds like me too. A lot of ADHD things are also things that people without ADHD sometimes struggle with. And the thing with ADHD is, it is not unlike autism, a bit of a spectrum where there's a range of symptoms that different people have to differing degrees. So my ADHD experience is not the same as someone else's. It's also the kind of thing where something that may also affect a neurotypical person sometimes applies to an ADHD person to a greater degree. But so one of the biggest kind of hallmarks of ADHD is the regulating of attention. So, that thing where some days I feel like I can really just like focus and get stuff done. And like, you can't even pull me away. Like you often go into this, it's like a flow state, but way more intense, called hyperfocus, where you miss meetings, you forget to eat, you forget to drink, you forget to use the bathroom, you look up from your computer and it's like 8:00 at night and you've spent like 12 hours coding and you don't know how you got there. So that's a blessing and a curse. It's got its own benefits and downsides. ADHD folks typically have a really big, if you're in computer terms, a really big hard drive. Like I can remember lots of crazy specific details from like this birthday party I was at in second grade, and who was wearing what and what exactly happened, and what my friend Scott's favorite cartoon was in first grade when we were in kindergarten with her, or not in first kindergarten, whatever. Anyways, right, all these details, but my RAM is absolute garbage. So I have almost no working memory. And this is kind of like another hallmark symptom of ADHD, where if someone tells you 3 things, you either remember the first or the last thing and forget everything else, because you just can't hold more than 1 or 2 things in your active working memory at a time. And if they don't get written down into long-term memory, or ideally like in a notebook or like a digital like capture device, they just get garbage collected by your brain and you forget all about them. So that's a really common thing. But there's a whole range of other things like time blindness is another big one. So Kevin, you know how like when you're having fun, time seems to move more quickly, and when you move, like when you're bored, it moves a little bit more slowly. So like it's like that, but way more intense. Like I literally can never accurately tell you how much time has passed at any particular time. And like the boring, slow stuff is like literally physically painful. This makes some interesting challenges if you work in an agency environment where you need to provide really tight estimates on how long something is going to take or how long something did take. So you can ask me how long it's going to take to do something. I usually can't tell you. I can make something up. It will probably be wrong. Even if I've done that task before, I don't know. if I don't have an active timer running to capture how long it's taken me to do something, I also cannot tell you because I will not remember when I started, and I will have no perception of how long I've actually been working on it. One of the fun conversations, like I'll have, conversations with my wife, and I'll be like, like literally just this morning, she's like, that wasn't this morning. That was like a week and a half ago. Like everything just kind of, time is an illusion in my brain. And I potentially have time blindness worse than some other folks, especially as I've gotten a little bit older. But it's a really big part of the ADHD experience is the way time works in very, very funny ways. And then there's just a whole bunch of other like little things that may or may not actually apply to you depending on your particular life situation.
My son was just officially diagnosed with it. My younger one, say 6 months ago or something. Yeah, and we're 99% sure my wife does have it as well. Her side of the family in general is a bit more on.
One of you probably does because it is genetic. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but she hasn't been tested, and she's been thinking about it. For my son, it makes sense because, there's different things at schools that they'll take into account now if you have a diagnosis. But if there's any adults listening that are, maybe I have it, maybe I don't, do you think it's worth getting officially diagnosed? Or do you think it's just if you see a lot of these symptoms, or not symptoms is the wrong word, but...
No, that's fine. You can call it
yeah, if you see a lot of yourself in what you're saying, is it just one of those things that you maybe look for resources to see if like different strategies and different things help you out, or is the official diagnosis actually something that could be worthwhile?
The answer is it depends. Just like everything in life. So if you don't mind, if you'll bear with me for a minute while I unpack this.
Of course.
So yeah. I think the most important part for most people is the knowing. And you don't need an official diagnosis for that. So if you go over to ADHDforthewin.com/Kevin Powell, I have a bunch of resources related to stuff Kevin and I are going to talk about. One of them is a link to Attitude Magazine, where they have a self-assessment where you can answer a bunch of questions, and it will tell you, sounds like you probably have it, or seems like you probably don't. And for a lot of folks, that's good enough. I was actually just reading a study this morning about how, and again, this applies to kids, but I think it applies to adults too. Students who are not just told that they have ADHD, but are taught, or dyslexia or autism, whatever their neurodivergence is, who are taught not just that they have a thing, but how their brain works and why it works differently. Even if no other kind of like treatments or things are done, do much better academically than students with those conditions who are not told or explained. Because once you know and you understand, I'm not dumb or I'm not bad at this, it's just that my brain works differently because of these reasons, and therefore I can come up with something that works for me, that works around that. You come up with strategies that help you. I'm not bad at homework because I'm not smart enough to do math. It's just really boring because I've done this same type of problem 8 times and I got it after the third one. I don't need to do these, Yeah. So knowing that and then applying that to like as an adult in a working environment, I think the knowing is a huge chunk of being able to not just, I don't like to say manage your ADHD. I want developers who have it to thrive. I want you to recognize that there will be things that are much harder for you, but there will also be things you can do way better than neurotypical folks. And if you lean into those, you can just completely crush whatever you want to do. Just, understanding yourself. So knowing is an important part. Knowing also allows you to ask for accommodations at work if you feel comfortable disclosing that you have ADHD. And different countries have different rules around this. In America, it is the Americans with Disabilities Act. In Canada, it is the Canadian Human Rights Act. Requires employers to give you reasonable accommodations for recognized disabilities, including ADHD. I hate that I don't think of it as a disability, but I'm grateful that, laws that apply to disabilities also provide protections there, because it does make certain things harder. And then in the UK, it's called the Equality Act of 2010 that also does it there. And the EU I haven't really dug into that much, so I can't say. But at least in the US, you don't technically need an official diagnosis to tell your employer, I have ADHD and I would like these accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act because they would help me do my job better. Having an official diagnosis from a psychiatrist can make it easier if your company decides to give you a hard time. I've heard of companies that are like, oh, we don't really have a form for ADHD. This is more for like people in wheelchairs or like people with visual impairments, right? You might get some of that. So having an official diagnosis can give you like some weight to swing around if you want to. But the other benefit of having an official diagnosis, if you want to go there, is you can then access prescription medication that can alleviate, I shouldn't say alleviate, it can help you use your ADHD to its fullest potential. So I went 40 something years without ADHD medication. I developed a ton of systems and strategies that worked really well for me. Now that I'm in my 40s, I am finding that those systems don't work quite as well as they used to. And I don't know if it's just I'm at a stage in my life where there's way more going on. So my already limited executive function is being taxed even more than it was, or my brain is aging and it's slowing down. So like stuff that used to be easier isn't working as well. Or is it like lingering symptoms from that COVID infection from a year ago or something else entirely? I'm not sure. But I actually, today is day one for me of, I just started Adderall. And I'm not sure how it's working or not. It's a very small dose and I'm still figuring it out. But one of the things I have observed from other folks who have taken medication, and this is part of what inspired me to pursue it, is it doesn't, one of the big concerns I had was like changing your personality or making you into a bit of like a robot. But what I've actually observed is the toughest parts of ADHD. One of the things I didn't mention was emotional regulation. So ADHD folks are really prone to extreme, sometimes outsized emotional reactions to different situations. We lack impulse control. So like, we sometimes do riskier behaviors and that kind of stuff. Adderall or other ADHD medications, they all give your brain more dopamine. They can smooth some of that out, make it a little bit easier for you to not have those impulses, but do that thing that neurotypical folks do before, like they're like, hey, this rock looks like it would be really cool to jump off of. Let me jump off of it. Go, wait a minute. This is high enough. I might break my ankle. Maybe I shouldn't do that. Right. Or I don't want to do this task right now, but it needs to get done. So I'm just going to work on it for 10 minutes. Right. Like that's really hard for me normally. I've observed that folks who take medication for ADHD sometimes have a slightly easier time task switching. They still hyperfocus. They still do all the great things that ADHD gives you, but it's a little bit easier for them to like control it. This analogy just came to me. Those of you who know X-Men, it's a little bit like the glasses that Cyclops wears. His powers are still there. It just allows him to not blast everybody with his eyeball death ray. He can like control when it comes on and comes off and point it where he wants. It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
So sorry, long-winded way of saying you don't need an official diagnosis. I think for many people, self-diagnosis is perfectly fine. But if you think you might benefit from meds or you need a little bit more leverage at work, getting an official diagnosis can be helpful, although it is a lengthy and sometimes expensive process depending on where you live.
Yep. Cool. Thank you. One thing there you did mention was that you had a lot of systems and different things you've put in place to sort of help you be more successful with it, dealing with it. So, I'm sure some people listening would love to hear some of the tips or tricks you might have that could help them out.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one, the biggest one, the most important thing for me is writing everything down. As I mentioned, we have really bad working memory. If you don't write it down, you will forget it. And the key thing for me is I had to make this a habit because it's not neurotypically normal when someone is asking you to do things or just talking to you, casual conversation. Boss is like, hey, I need you to do 3 things for me. Like being like, hold on, let me pull out my phone and open my app. Like it's uncomfortable to do at first, but it's a really important habit to get into. I even do this like my wife. I'm running to the supermarket to grab eggs. Do you need anything else? Oh yeah, could you grab a rotisserie chicken and some toothpaste. Oh, we also need, once that third thing, oh, hold on, I got to open the thing or I'm going to forget it all, right? But there was a time where I'd try to keep it all up here and then I'd forget. I'd always come home with fewer things than we needed. So writing it down is literally the most important thing. I have found that most productivity systems that center around making lists really get into over-engineering. So like getting things done is a big example. In that system, you make a list and then you add all these like context tags, like this is a phone activity, this is an email activity, this is an in the car activity. It's all too complicated. Like you're going to burn out. The system becomes the thing you do and then it gets boring and then you toss it aside. So
Right. Yeah.
for me, it's either, I used to use paper because it's easy to just whip out a pen, but I'd always forget my notebooks and then I'd never have the thing to write stuff down with. So right now I use Obsidian. In the past, I used to use Microsoft To Do. But it's, if you do use a system like Obsidian or Notion, please, I beg you, do not over-engineer it. Don't add all the plugins and extensions and Gantt charts and all. Just don't do any of it. Just treat it like a notebook. Open it up. It's a simple bulleted list. If you have an idea, it's a bullet. If you have a to-do, make it a checkbox instead. And then within most of those, there's ways to sort through. Like you can see all of the to-do items in one spot. So I write everything down, and then every morning I look at my all to-dos list and I flag just a small handful of things that I need to get done that day. The way you do this varies by tool. In Obsidian, I add a unicorn emoji to the item and it automatically pulls it into the special daily to-do list. Yeah. And then the other aspect of this, the other part of the system is most neurotypical productivity advice says start with your biggest, most important thing first, right? Like eat the big frog, like make sure you get that big thing done. For ADHD brains, our brains have a lot of inertia. And inertia isn't just like movement energy. It's like a very heavy object that's sitting still has a lot of stationary inertia. So like getting it moving is really hard. And if you try to jump right into your biggest task, unless it's something you're really excited about, you will probably fail because you're going to stare at your screen and not know where to start. So I recommend starting with either your smallest task or the one you're most excited about first, because it's going to get your brain moving in the direction of work. Even if it's not a work-related thing, like it could be like, oh, I got to go pay this bill. I can do that online right now, right? Just you want to be doing something that's not doing nothing. And then you get this dopamine hit of like checking it off. And then you do the next big thing and you keep going. And so that's really been kind of the heart of the actual like doing things. And then the second component is recognizing that your brain doesn't have enough dopamine and that there's a lot of things that mess with your ability to get done. All the rest of my systems and strategies are around doing work that works with the kinds of things I find interesting and I'm good at, and creating a working environment that does not distract me. And that is honestly, that's like, I want to say even more than 50% of the battle. Just setting up your work environment for success is huge because it is so easy to get distracted, derailed, especially if you work in an office. It's just like a nightmare situation for a lot of folks.
Yeah. A lot of the things you're saying there, I do, or I won't say I do those, but I've, I think for anybody having some systems in place can help. And I think then but definitely I've gone down the over engineering of Notion in the past. And then I've sort of figured it out over time and I got it working for me. And anytime I post about it, the most common thing is people saying like, oh, I tried it and it was too much. And it's like, you have to keep it simple because it's so easy for those to become the project, like you said. And then you're not going to do it. Yeah.
Especially, I think for most people, but when you have ADHD, you will like, I'm going to set up the perfect to-do system and I will always get everything done. And then it becomes this huge hyperfixation where you're trying all the plugins and doing these really, And I think devs in general also suffer from this. Like I'm going to over-engineer things because I'm a coder. I can do it,
Yeah, you end up creating your own new system just to make a to-do list.
Kevin, every week I have like a don't build your own to-do app. Don't build your own to-do app. Like kind of like, like mantra to myself.
That's funny. For the other thing there I find too is with a few things that I've had, it's hard at the beginning to use them when they're not part of your everyday thing. Like you were saying, just
Mm-hmm.
taking notes. Like for me, I don't do that. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I probably benefit from writing everything down because as I'm getting older, I
Mm-hmm.
forget stuff all the time.
Yep.
Um, but it's one of those things that at the beginning when you don't have that habit, it's so hard to do it. And you just,
Yeah.
I think, I know for me anyway, it like to actually start using some of the systems I have in place for my content creation, I had to force myself to be like, this
Yeah.
is the thing that's opened on my desktop first thing in the morning. So I see it and I have to
Mm-hmm.
use it. And then I have to go back to it and check it. And now I've started doing like calendar blocking for my time blocks and stuff. And I just have
Mm-hmm.
to be like, you have to do it. And at the beginning, it's weird and I go off track and then I stop doing it for a few days. But eventually it did become habit. And now I'm happy I did it. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was really hard to create those new habits for me.
Yeah. One of the and I agree, habits are hard in general. One of the number one tools that has helped me is having a smartwatch.
Mm.
I'm in the Apple ecosystem, so I have an Apple Watch, but there are others. Like there are plenty of I think significantly more affordable and reasonable Android options as well. But the and I recognize it's a luxury to have one, but having a thing on my wrist that shows me when exactly my next meeting is, that I can set timers or alerts for, and it will buzz me. Like it's really the thing with watches is they do just enough and not too much. So like you can do all the same things on a phone, but you go to check a thing on your phone and then you're like, oh, let me just check my email. Let me open Slack. Let me open Discord. Ooh, I wonder what's happening on like Twitter or Mastodon right now. Right. And it just becomes a whole rabbit hole. Whereas I can't do any of that on my watch. So I get a buzz. I see my calendar. I dismiss it. I get an alarm to go switch the laundry. I go do it. Right. Or I snooze it and I do it again when it goes off. Yeah, for habits, I will typically set some sort of alarm or reminder every day until it becomes a thing that I feel
Mm.
like my brain does it on autopilot and I feel weird if I don't. Like I write 2 daily newsletters and I feel off if I don't start my day with a cup of coffee and my newsletter. That's the routine. But it took a while to get there.
Yeah, definitely. I could imagine that. And I do agree with the watch over the phone for the same thing. I have one. I stopped using it for a long time, and then I started with it again recently. And like you said, just the lack of other distractions is definitely a positive because with the time blocking I'm doing, it just
Mm.
buzzes me every time it's a new time block, and I
Mm-hmm.
find that super useful instead of it being on my phone because that's exactly what I would do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really, a lot of folks are like really into Pomodoros and they don't work for
Yes.
me, but like bigger time blocks with just a buzz on the watch would probably work for me in a way that like a pop-up alert on my computer wouldn't. That's neat. I'll have to try that.
Yeah. I agree.
Good suggestion,
Pomodoro.
Kevin.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing we've talked about, sort of that, there's struggles that come with having it, and you can find
Mm-hmm.
different situations or different things to put in place to help deal with them. But you have mentioned sort of the hyper focus, and
Yeah.
a few times you've said different things about, there's the positives that come from it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Other than the hyper focus being too much and you forgetting to eat or go to the
Yeah.
bathroom, what would you say some of the positives that can come from having ADHD are, especially when it relates to dev work, but just in general as
Yeah.
well?
Yeah, no, and I will just on the hyper focus note, because I think I framed it in this chat a little bit as like you forget to do things that you shouldn't. But like, if you've ever been in a flow state before and you're firing on all cylinders and you're just getting stuff done, like hyper focus is that to an extreme. And so I will get like if I'm in a hyper focus mood, I can get sometimes like a week's worth of work done in a day. I am so absurdly productive. I don't know, it's almost like that Limitless movie that came
Mm.
out where like the dude like took that pill and he could just like see all these things other people couldn't. You're so absurdly productive and it's amazing. One of the other things that ADHD folks typically thrive with is entrepreneurial type roles. So
Mm.
that could mean starting your own business. It could mean that you're the type of person inside like a day job who does more entrepreneurial stuff. Like we're spinning off a new project and we need someone to kind of take lead on that. Or we've got this client who has this really unique problem we've never encountered before. We need someone to go figure it out. The lack of impulse control means that ADHD folks are more likely to jump into unclear or riskier situations without all of those nagging, what if this goes wrong? What if it backfires? What if I look like an idiot? Like I don't think through the outcomes enough to worry about that. I'm just like, ooh,
Right.
shiny ball, gone, right? And so whether you run your own business or you work for someone else, those are the kinds of tasks that you can just like absolutely crush it at, and be really, really good at. The other thing, similar but not exactly the same, ADHD folks tend to be absurdly creative, in a way that some neurotypical folks are, but sometimes neurotypical folks really struggle with. Like, we're really good at out of the box thinking. And I was having a chat with someone the other day about this, and one thought that had never occurred to me. So I once had someone describe the inside of my head as like a lottery ball machine, with all the balls bouncing all over the place. And like my self-awareness was this little puppy that's like ball, 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 right? And it was very accurate. It really felt like it at the time. But the thing is, if each of those balls is like an idea or a thing that like is currently on your mind, they're bouncing around and smashing into each other in lots of like really like weird and unexpected ways. And if the average neurotypical person is like, here's the thing, I'm focused on this, and your life can be a little bit more compartmentalized, it's sometimes more difficult for you to think in this big open empty box with all of these different things that are not related somehow being interconnected. But as an ADHD person, I'm thinking about all the things all the time. And so I will sometimes come up with weird kind of overlaps or connections to things that like someone else might not observe. When you couple that with, with that lack of impulse control, I don't go through the whole, oh, that would never work kind of thing, right? I'm like, oh, what? Let me just go whip something. So if you're at a company or something, or you're doing like work and you need to creatively solve a problem, your ADHD can be a real blessing there. It can help you. Sometimes you'll even get pushback from other folks like, oh, that would never work because, and your impulse might be like, well, how do you know? Right? Like, it seems like it wouldn't, but let's try it. So there's that piece of it. One other thing that's a blessing and a curse: the lack of impulse control means that I have no filter. I have a tendency to I think a thing, I say a thing. I am much like some of my autistic brethren. I am very direct, and I say what I mean what I say. There's no subtext, pretense. I often don't even I say what I mean. I'm very honest. The downside of that is sometimes you say what you mean, and what you mean is hurtful to someone who's in the room, right? Yeah. So there have been more times than I can count in my career where I have been, I would argue, justifiably critical of a business decision, a software choice, a piece of code, only to learn 30 seconds later that the thing I was insulting was created or decided by someone who was sitting directly across from me. And it's a real foot in the mouth moment where you got to try to backpedal and be like, well, I didn't mean it's garbage. I just meant the person who made it. No, not the person who made it. It might not, so there's that whole thing. But the flip side is, a lot of people in business environments do not say what they mean. They do yes, that's great. Yes, that's great. Whether it's great or not, they tell executives exactly what they want to hear. They tell their bosses exactly what they want to hear. And harnessed properly, you can be the person who is known in the company as the one who will give you a straight answer, regardless of whether it's popular or not. It won't always make you friends, but it can absolutely, channeled properly, be a professional asset. I remember once I learned to curb the whole, I just started asking who built this or who wrote this before I would give my opinion on it. And I would change the way I would explain it based on whether they were in the room or not. But once you get past that, I can distinctly remember multiple times either my manager or my manager's manager being like, Chris, you're someone who's not shy about giving an honest opinion. Can you tell me what you really think about this? And that's a really great place to be. That can position you as you think about what consultants do when they come into companies. They're hired because they're an outside perspective that will tell you what you want to hear, whether you want to hear what you need to hear, whether you want to or not. Yep. You could be that person either as a consultant or inside the company, you could be that like that voice of honesty that other folks won't be. You got to channel it right. That one's really tricky. Yeah, I'm sure there are others, Kevin, but they're not popping into my head right now.
No, that's all good. The other thing I'm curious about is, since you've been talking about it more since you started this, deciding to go down this and blogging about it and making a course on it and stuff, just how either, I don't like doing multi-part questions, but I guess, like, has it changed or I guess, have you learned new things about it? And also, has it changed your perspective at all about ADHD the more you've sort of dove into all of it?
So the biggest thing for me, and this is not like within the last year or so, this was probably around 2 or 3 years ago, where so I was diagnosed as a kid. ADHD takes several variants. One of them is, I think the one most people think of as ADHD, which is the really hyperactive version. But there's also another subtype of ADHD called inattentive, where you're not hyper. You just have trouble either focusing on things or regulating your attention or whatever. I've often heard that that's more common in women, but I think what I'm also observing is there's a lot of folks who get diagnosed as adults, and a lot of them I found are men with the inattentive subtype. So they're not hyperactive and it just got missed. So my hunch, not backed up yet, is that inattentive subtype is a lot more common in both or all genders than we previously realized, and it's just way underdiagnosed. But I was hyperactive, and I always thought of ADHD as the hyper kid thing, right? I can't sit still, all the things that come around the physical aspects of it. And then 3 or 4 years ago, we had another family member of ours who was diagnosed, and I started researching it a little bit more just to kind of, not just talk about my own experiences, but get a bigger perspective and be able to like talk to them about it. Man, has the science changed a lot in the last 30 years. So I suddenly started discovering that all these things that I thought were just weird personal quirks of mine were actually ADHD related as well. Like the time blindness, the inability to regulate emotions effectively, the impulse control, the beyond just being like hyper and like boisterous, like I know this is a bad decision, but I can't stop myself from doing it kind of stuff. Or one of the other big things we didn't talk about that's related to emotional regulation is rejection sensitivity dysphoria, where you will have something that's just like an offhanded comment you will interpret as this big rejection and like build up as a really huge thing in yourself, and start to internalize. And it's a whole thing, right? Like I was super emo in high school, more emo than just like I listened to Simple Plan, and I love, it was like, I eventually connected the dots. Like, oh, I bet if I had been medicated, I wouldn't have like had such a severe reaction to this kind of stuff. Like but we didn't know back. This was like 20 years ago. People didn't know. So yeah, for me, it's been a lot of the beyond hyperactivity aspects of ADHD were newish to me. And it's been it's the funniest thing. Like it doesn't change anything about me, but knowing that it's related to ADHD and that it's not my fault that I can't not be like that has made it much easier for me to both accept myself as who I am and come up with more effective strategies to not change those things about me, but manage them in a way that lets me function in a neurotypical society a bit more.
That's interesting. That's really interesting there. Thank you.
Nice.
So yeah, we talked about the site, and I think I mentioned it quickly offhand that you also made a course.
Yes.
Into doing it. Do you want to let people know a little bit about what the course entails as well? Yeah.
So it's the polite version is getting stuff done with ADHD. I swear a lot, so it's got bad words in the title. But so this is literally me putting 20 years of figuring out how to actually get stuff done in a professional context into a set of like short made for ADHD folks tutorials. So the thing with me, like I remember my first 3 weeks into my first like real full-time, I'm a serious professional kind of job. I remember going home to my then fiance and being like, I'm now wife, and being like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get fired. Like I'm floundering. And it wasn't like I couldn't do the job. It's just my boss kept throwing lots of little things at me, nothing too difficult, but I couldn't, it was like trying to juggle too many balls. I couldn't keep it all up in the air. And at the time, again, thinking ADHD was just, I'm hyper. I didn't connect the dots to like, I don't have enough RAM to hold this all in my head. So I opened up Google, I typed in how to get things done, and I discovered this whole world of productivity gurus. And I started like diving into getting things done and like Merlin Man and Inbox Zero and just all these systems. And they all worked a little bit for a little bit of time before they kind of fell apart. And I eventually realized that they were all just like way too complex for me. And eventually I settled into this system where I cherry picked like a little bit from here, a little bit from there, a little bit from there, and cobbled it together into this thing that actually like worked the way my brain worked. So there's nothing in this course that's particularly groundbreaking, but it's really just me documenting like, hey, here's how your brain works. Here's how you can work with your brain. So I think a lot of productivity systems fight against the way a brain like mine naturally wants to work. And I've put together something that works more with it than against it. It recognizes these are your limitations. These are things you're really good at. Here's what to do when this happens and you need to get stuff done anyways. Here's some things you can do to like kickstart your brain. Yeah. So the heart of it, we already talked about it a little bit, but like the heart of the system is writing things down. The other aspect is some approaches to actually starting your work, which we also talked about. And then the last aspect of it that's relatively small is around like cleanup. I call it defragging your brain, right? Where for those of you who are old enough to remember like Windows 3, right? Or Windows XP, like over time, like stuff in memory would get put in really weird places and it would be like scattered all over. And you'd have to run a defrag on your computer and it would clean it all up and put it in a more efficient, like organized like way. Every now and then you got to go do that with your notebook too, because it'll get really messy and then it gets hard to do stuff. So, going through and cleaning that all up. So that's it. And then I have a whole section focused on, I call it hacking your brain's operating system, but it's all about like, so if you know how your brain works, here's a whole bunch of things you can do to exploit that instead of like fighting it, right? Like a typical working environment is structured around how neurotypical brains work best. And that's not me. So, there's all sorts of things you can do to not just give your brain the best possible chance of getting things done, but to really like thrive and do what it does best. So it's all about.
Yeah. Cool. Sounds
your
really
mileage may vary, but it's worked well for me and a few other folks I've shared it with. So
it sounds really interesting.
Maybe it will for you too.
Awesome. And so the course is how to get stuff. No, I'm going to say it wrong.
Yeah, no, how to get stuff done with ADHD.
Oh, it is. Okay. Yeah. Not with stuff.
But stuff is not stuff. Stuff is like poop emoji.
And then the website itself is
ADHDforthewin.com/getting SHIT done.
Awesome. And I'll put links to everything.
But it's like linked to right on the homepage. So if you go to ADHDforthewin.com/Kevin Powell, you will find a link to that and a whole bunch of articles that dig deeper into all the different things we've been talking about today.
Awesome.
And some stuff we didn't.
I'll include links in the description as well as to your socials and other stuff if people want to get in touch or talk with you.
Yeah, please do. And in all seriousness, if you're someone who has ADHD, think you have ADHD, have someone in your life that has ADHD, and you have questions, please reach out. I am more than happy to talk about this stuff with anybody who wants to, because it's a journey. And if you have support, you can really like have an amazing work, career, and life with it. But if you don't, it can sometimes be a slog. So I'm here.
And that is it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. If you're interested, definitely go and check out the link in the description to look at more of the information from Chris, as well as his course, if you're interested in that. And of course, until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.